Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our readers and listeners of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We want to thank our audience for questions coming from @Uranium Insider, Jackie A., Brent S., and Jared W. We have Bill Sheriff on the line today. Bill is the chairman of Encore Energy, a U.S.-focused uranium explorer and developer. Encore is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under symbol EU and on the U.S. OTC markets under the symbol TGRUF. Bill, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Well, so where are you talking to us from today?
Calling from Dallas, Texas.
Excellent. Well, I got to pull this one on you. So we're a couple hours before the Fed rate decision. Bill, where do you see them going with this rate increase, or are they going to stay the same?
It's really hard to say. I think there'll be at least one more rate increase, whether they do it today or early in the new year. There's been such I don't want to say fear in the market, because it's been actually quite an orderly sell-off, and everyone seems to be living in Alice in Wonderland and think it's going to come right back. And by the dips as always, but this dip's starting to be prolonged and starting to look an awful lot like a bear market. So I think that somewhat irrelevant of what the Fed does, I think we're in a bear market, and I think we'll be there for a while. And the rest of the world is, and I don't think the U.S. can withstand that being the only island of prosperity.
So far, natural resources are starting to act a little bit differently in the last couple months. I see that you'll have big down days, and you'll see also that GDX and a lot of the miners are up, even sometimes uranium as well. But certainly the base and precious metals seem to be performing a little bit better as the market kind of sells off. So that's interesting. So, Bill, give us your background going back before the last uranium cycle. Tell us about your ventures during the last cycle and what past successes and failures you are applying to this current cycle.
Well, the list of failures is probably too long for your program, so why don't we just acknowledge there have been a few, but so far not any in the uranium cycle. So maybe I should wisen up and stick to uranium. But no, I'm a geologist by education. I have a master's degree in geology, and I've spent a good deal of time in the public markets, having worked as a broker and market maker over a number of years for different firms. Been involved with the junior sector for the last 20-some years, most notably with Energy Metals Corp, which I co-founded with Paul Matisek. Started out with $1.6 million market cap in summer of 2004, and during the next 30 months, we amassed the U.S.'s largest historic uranium resource base of all time, and ended up selling to the somewhat infamous Uranium One, and sold out for somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5 to 1.8 billion, depending on what date you use, because it was right at the top and things were rolling over. But needless to say, the shareholders were quite happy. Not often you get a 30-month run like that in resources. It's more of a high-tech type run than resources. So we were quite fortunate and hit all of the hurdles at the right time in terms of financing, in terms of acquisitions, announcements, mergers, and putting together an elite team of professionals. I'd say really being on top of the uranium market. I still think there's a significant number of players in the junior space that could probably do with a bit more education in the uranium market. It's certainly one of the more complicated resource markets out there. The price of uranium is not the only bellwether, if you will, in the industry that determines the health and well-being of uranium miners. It's the understanding and getting as much of a handle as you can, and I don't think anybody can do it fully, on the nuclear fuel cycle, which is all the way from uranium discovery and mining all the way through, conversion, enrichment, fabrication, use in the power plants, and then finally decommissioning and reclamation of the facilities. So it's many parts of that are interchangeable. So you don't have just, as I say, a very simple commodity-driven price market. So it's a bit more complicated than that.
Yes, absolutely. We continue at SmithWeekly Research. Folks really need to do a significant amount of due diligence and understanding how things work. And there's many aspects, and it's not just buying some equities and with a prayer. It's certainly a very technical, complex market, the uranium space, and folks need to understand everything from digging it out of the ground all the way to how it works in a reactor and everything in between. So tell me about you're back, and there's kind of an encore, if you will, to what you've done in the past. So give us some information about Encore, and
sure.
Tell us with that as well. Tell us how what is the strategy this time around? Is it a similar strategy this time around with Encore?
No, and we may be wrong, but our bets are being placed that it will not be a pounds in the ground game this time. That was fun. That was meteoric. It was grown up monopoly, if you will, picking as many properties as you could and being in the right spot at the right time. But I think this time will be a different in two main ways. Number one, I think the price action that we see in uranium will be far less restricted than it was last time. I don't think you're going to see $150 uranium, certainly not in a 30-month time span. I think what you will see, however, is a more sustainable long-term price move, which would be welcome news to the industry that hasn't seen such a thing in probably 40 or 50 years. I think a sustained move into the upper double digits, say $50 to $90, would be a very welcome pricing for the industry. And it's hard to predict and build future plants and capacity when you don't have any price stability. So I think that'll be one big difference. The other big difference as a result of that is I think it will be production oriented. Not to say there won't be some gains to be made by the straight explorers and the straight pounds in the ground, but I don't think it'll be a 200 contestants seeing how many pounds in the ground they can get. All boats rise with the tide. I just don't see that coming this time. I think those that can map out a pathway to production and have a more mature, if you will, view of the marketplace and ability to function in it will be rewarded.
Okay. And so for those talking about Encore, for those who might not be familiar with the company, give us an overview of the management team, the share structure, the key shareholders, compensation, and the key projects.
Sure. Well, the compensation's easy. Nobody's made a nickel on it for the last few years. We've been in a hiatus mode. We were just on the edge of a transformative transformation, literally days before Fukushima. When that happened, sent a letter out to our shareholders telling them game over for 5 to 10 years, which was not well received, neither by the shareholders or the competitors in the business. I think I had 47 phone calls or emails from colleagues in the business saying I was nuts and it was only a small problem and it would be short-lived. But because of that, our company's gone into cash preservation. We've got right at $1 million in the treasury. We've simply keep the company alive and keep the properties and have slowly acquired additional properties over the last few years. In terms of who's here, we've got pretty much the technical team from Energy Metals intact. Dennis Stover is our CEO. Dennis is one of the holders of patents on the in situ process. Worked for years for Rio Algom, built Inkai in Kazakhstan for Cameco. Has been in the business since the very early days of in situ leaching and is still quite active. We've also got Mark Beliza on board, who spent a great deal of time with Uranium Resources. Did a lot of their permitting. Has been involved with the actual running of their in situ plants in Texas when they were operating there. And has a real keen observation on pricing and metrics within the uranium industry. And Richard Cherry's also involved with us. Richard formerly run General Atomics. He's acted as a fuel buyer on both sides of the equation, both from industry and utilities, and as such brings us that level of expertise. We've also got a gentleman, Joe Harrington, that's involved with us. That's on the reclamation end, which is critical anytime you're dealing with any kind of resources, but certainly I think maybe even more so when you're dealing with the nuclear industry and the radiometric aspects of it. Those are the key members. I'm sure I'm omitting a few and missing a few, but we've also got our landman, Gordon Peak, that's been with us for years. So basically, everyone on board is being incentivized with options. We've all got been in the industry for a long time. I'm the newbie in the industry, having only been involved with it for 20 some years. Most of these guys are 30 and 40 year veterans of the industry, and that kind of brings me to, I guess, the point that kind of underlies all of this is we firmly believe as a company that there is no shortage of uranium. There's a shortage of ability to get it out of the ground and bring it to market. And
that's right.
There's absolutely no shortage of it. And so by and large, we do not have too many plans for exploration. There's quality assets available to be picked up. We've got quite a few in our inventory currently. And there are certain instances where you will need to do exploration, ourselves included, but by and large, and they're certainly taking nothing away from the big success stories in the Athabasca, where you're truly looking at monster deposits with monster grade. Presumably there'll always be a market for those superior deposits. So exploration in some places makes a lot of sense, but exploration for the sake of exploration in uranium is probably perhaps one of the few commodities that we really just don't need a general exploration effort for.
Right.
But, as I mentioned before, and I have to apologize to your listeners, I'm a little under the weather here, but so things may be a little disjointed. But no one in the company is compensated in any way other than the landman on an hourly basis. None of the officers receive anything other than options. We are all well incentivized with options. We have a great belief in one another, the company, the projects we have, and the future of uranium. So it's with Encore, you're basically looking at a package of incredible depth of talent in terms of technical ability, coupled with good established projects, and we believe that we've got the fuel cycle covered from discovery through implementation to reclamation. And so we look at it as a holistic view, and think that's what we offer the investors.
Right, and it's good that you guys have been. It's impressive what you said with, I sent a letter out to shareholders and said this is over, game over. Congratulations to you for having the visionary leadership to be able to just do that and be done with it. Whereas other companies, peer companies, even in the U.S. and in other places, continue to pay themselves lavishly and completely why they couldn't mine any more uranium because the price was bad. They decided to go ahead and start mining the shareholders instead. So I commend you for your efforts to keep it going.
We weren't big enough to do that even if we'd wanted to, but we don't. We just don't view it that way, and it's the long-term benefit of the shareholders that our interests are aligned, and that's where we'll all prosper. When the time's right in the given market, but you've got to stay in the game to win it, and that's the way we've structured the whole company. We've also got Bill Harris on board, who I failed to mention, and Bill, while he's not an expert in the uranium field, spent many years at C-level positions in Fortune 500 companies. And in fact, we brought him on board simply to, I don't mean to demean it by simply, but as a sole purpose to meet the Sarbanes-Oxley requirements when our predecessor company, Energy Metals, went to the New York Stock Exchange. we were required to up our game, if you will, in terms of financial accountability. And we were very fortunate to get Bill to join us. And he serves the same function for us, and very good business advice, as well as heading up our audit committee.
Okay. So just moving kind of to another subject, just briefly, so people can have kind of a
Sure.
view of what you've been doing while you've not been doing much at Encore. So while Encore has been on care and maintenance, if you will, in your spare time, you've been working on advancing Golden Predator, a Canadian-focused gold explorer. How are things going there?
That's right. Well, they're going quite well. We've been active in the Yukon exclusively since about 2009. And we've been advancing with a renewed interest here of late, the Brewery Creek deposit, where we took it from roughly 100,000 ounces. Its former producer, Viceroy, operated from 96 to 2002, the world's first sub-Arctic heap leach. And they produced roughly 400,000 ounces of gold during that time. We picked the property up and have since taken it to about 1.5 million ounces in our latest 43-101. I haven't done much work on it since 2013 until this year was our first drilling program. We're going back in looking to improve the metallurgy. There is a PEA out on it. It's somewhat dated at 2014. It was positive economics, even at current gold prices, but it wasn't compelling, only an 18% IRR. And so we've started looking at ways to maximize or optimize that project. There's still a great deal of unexplored terrain. In fact, our drilling this year illustrated the prospectivity of 3 or 4 of the new trends. So it's taken on a new life, and I think you'll see it move forward to the position to where hopefully we can interest a partner in the coming year. Our main effort there has been on the 3 Aces, which is a very high-grade orogenic gold deposit in southeast Yukon. And that deposit has taken from basically an outcrop with a handful of drill holes on it to we put in, I think, over 30 kilometers of roads, and have actually started bulk sampling, actually generating a bit of revenue as a byproduct of our scientific efforts pouring gold. And these high-grade orogenic veins are such that getting a look at them in 3D through bulk sampling and determining the metallurgy is very important to us. Just wrapped up probably about 6 weeks ago our winter drill program, and look forward to those results coming out early in the new year, as well as an update on the bulk sample. This year's bulk sample was quite significantly larger than our first one. The first one we did 776 tons and produced a little over 1,000 ounces of gold. This year we took in excess of 10 times that sample. So, to be able to augment your efforts, or at least have them partially paid for through the bulk sampling, while you're learning about the deposit and performing very valuable and necessary metallurgical work is a bit of a unique approach, but it's one that served us well there.
Well, we'll leave it there with that. We've been watching Golden Predator from the sidelines, and so it looks like there's some interesting stuff coming up in 2019 for the company, and we'll leave it there for the audience to go take a look. So Bill, back to Encore. Is there any near-term plans to upgrade the U.S. OTC markets listing to a QB or QX status?
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that. I was just speaking to Mr. Power with OTC Markets this last week, and we would look to do that sometime here in the next half. I won't say quarter, but half. So it's something that's on our radar screen. I won't commit to an exact date, but we are aware that I believe over half of our shareholders probably are based in the U.S. and certainly, even many of those that are overseas would find it easier to trade with the U.S. listing. So it's something that we're looking at. We have a very polarized view of the uranium market, and it's a good segue into that. A lot of the listeners may not be aware, but for many years, in fact decades, the uranium price had a split price. There were 2 prices for uranium, one being a free world price, and one being a domestic or a U.S. price. And of course, that was during the height of the Cold War. But I think we're on the verge of seeing that again, and not for the same reasons as the Cold War, thankfully. But I think there's a petition 232 that URE or UR Energy and Energy Fuels were the sponsors of, to the Department of Commerce to basically get 25% of the U.S.'s nuclear demand fulfilled through domestic sources by the year 2025. And while I'm somewhat skeptical that you'll see a response, giving or granting exactly what was asked for, because it might show a bit of favoritism or something, I think you're not unlikely to see some sort of relief granted, whether it be in the form of tariffs or quotas or some other incentive which would spur U.S. Production. U.S. production right now is small single digits of its need, and it's the world's biggest consumer. And we're relying upon such stable places as Kazakhstan and Russia for a good portion of that uranium. So I think it's a domestic security issue. Certainly, that's one that the Trump administration is keenly aware of, and I would not be surprised if we see some sort of support for the domestic industry. Again, we're 100% domestic focused, so we would be a beneficiary of that, and that's why we're 100% domestic focused, is because this is where the world's largest demand for uranium is.
Right.
So we would be looking for that to come along sometime in this calendar year. We are not nearly as positive as some companies on the worldwide price of uranium. I think we're still probably a couple of years out on it. One of the things we look at for a real market turn is the SWU price, which very few people follow, but it's the separative work unit price, and you can Google it and pull it up.
Yep.
And until it starts to move off of the bottom, I don't think any move in yellow cake's going to be prolonged. And because it's basically a trade-off in the energy in terms of the amount of energy you can put in and squeeze out of a given piece of ore to get the fissionable isotope of uranium out. And
right.
It's a bit of a trade-off here again, as I was talking about the fuel cycle. It's one of those trade-offs, and you kind of have to have everything moving in sync to get a prolonged market move, and that has not shown any sign of life yet. So we think we're early on the international price, but we think the timing might possibly be optimal for the domestic side of things.
Right. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this kind of goes, because you have a number of issues at play. And I think any outcome on this 232 is positive, because it gets it off the table. The utilities, if they have to buy their 12% the first year, or 25% or whatever that is from U.S. domestic suppliers, that's great. Let's get that going. Let's get that off the table. And then the utilities also are now free to go ahead and fill the remaining of their requirements how they wish to do that. So it kind of, and then on top of that too, Bill, you have Russia. This is a competition thing too, and the 232 cleaning that up and getting it off there is the question is the U.S. gonna start to step back out on a global stage, on a global basis, and compete for nuclear projects, compete for the fuel cycle, compete by offering financing to these other countries who are looking to get into the nuclear energy mix. And right now you see Russia and China are leading that. They're taking market share away from the U.S., and it is a significant issue, and it spans just beyond national security. It goes to globally. Do you want to be everybody is going to be influenced by Russian and Chinese financing and the nuclear the fuel cycles with these other countries, or is the U.S. going to start to take back some of that market share?
Well, that's right. It's a key consideration, and especially when you're talking about the complete vertical integration. You buy your reactor from Russia, and then you're also on the hook for a 30 or 50-year fuel contract to buy your fuel through Russia. So it's the turnkey approach that Russia and China are both using, which of course is nothing new. That's what Areva's been doing for years. But Russia and China, as you say, are gobbling up market share very quickly and largely unopposed at the moment.
Right.
I think that would be critical. But, I think here again that the initial step for the domestic industry is some sort of pricing relief or some sort of market support. Here again, be it quotas or tariffs or what have you. I think we'll see something to spur that. And I think it's also important to note that even so, the prime beneficiaries are clearly going to be those guys with the production capabilities, or those that are in production in the U.S., being UR Energy and Energy Fuels. So then there's probably a couple others, but those are the main ones. But if you start doing the math, it's pretty clear that you can't, of current sources that are ready to go on the market in these limited facilities, you can't get to 25% of domestic production by the year 2025 without some significant grade changes or some significant deposits coming online. And that's one of the reasons that we've focused our efforts of late on the higher grade breccia pipes in the Arizona district. Now, they aren't high grade by comparison to Athabasca Basin, but they're certainly high grade in the U.S. Probably the highest grade deposits in the U.S. And that's the place that we see that we would plan to do a bit of exploration. But these are typically smaller mines, but they're very high grade. We're generally fairly quickly to bring onto production. And we've got, I think, a dominant land position, a dominant geophysical survey position, and a number of verified pipes that we know are mineralized in that area. So we've got an awfully good position there. And it's within trucking distance to Energy Fuels mill. And while we have no direct guaranteed benefit with them, they are our largest shareholders. So I think we'd certainly have a good place in line to have access to their mill for certainly for a fee, a tolling arrangement.
Right. And we have a couple points on that I want to get to. But going back to what you said about the capex, the industry is going to need a few billion. The capex to get to 25%. All I got to say is you better get the permitting shoved aside. You better relax a few things, and you better get the money raised if you're going to have anywhere close to that 25% requirement by 2025. And that's a challenge to get that done. And
it is.
We had talked to Bill just. I don't know, it was probably a month ago, we had talked to Walter Coles at Virginia Energy Jr., and he said he was very optimistic. He was incredibly optimistic on how he thinks that this is actually going to play out. And of course, as you know, they've been in the heat with the Supreme Court and so forth. So, but he's extremely optimistic on the outcome of this Section 232.
No, I think so, and I think it solves a lot of other problems as well. There's a certain taint in the current Washington politics about Russia, and I think you can cure two ills with one action here. You can effectively slap Russia around a bit, or maybe not. Maybe that's not the right word, but have a hard line against Russia, and at the same time prop up domestic uranium, all with the same action. So I think you get the politicians, I think, will see a twofer here, and they may not always do what's right, but they always know what's economical in terms of vote getting. So,
right, and there might be kind of a backhand slapped on this domestic boost in wake of the Uranium One politics. So it'd be
absolutely. I think you definitely get a multiple points there. And,
So those who aren't up to speed on the acquisition of Metamin, can you give us the legal status of the projects in Arizona on state lands
yes.
and also on federal lands?
That's a great question because it's a complex issue that's pretty well misunderstood, I would say, by most. With a broad brush, there is a temporary moratorium against exploration for uranium in and around the Grand Canyon area, which is basically northern Arizona. It does not affect state land, it does not affect private land, and it does not affect all federal land. There's probably 70% of our targets are affected, but I think more importantly, we've got, I think, a dozen, of which 3 or 4 are verified mineralized pipes that are clearly outside of that. So we're free to go along, and 12 of our projects are bonded and ready to have exploration on them. So, if you go back and look at the consideration that was paid, clearly we acquired a pretty impressive database, pretty good land position for very little consideration other than welcoming Metamin in as a significant shareholder to Encore. But that is simple. That whole transaction was valued with a substantial discount of that withdrawal in place. Partially in alignment with, not in conjunction with, but on the coattails of 232, we've been doing quite a bit of lobbying in Washington, and one of the few things we've actually spent any money on to get that relaxed. And obviously we're quite happy with the position we've got, even if the ban were to stay in place. But if that ban were to be removed or relaxed or partially removed, specifically on the northern side of the canyon, which is less populated and more heavily influenced by Utah than Arizona, and we do have some pretty broad political support to get that reversed on that side, that would be a real win for Encore. Be basically taking 70% of the projects that were valued at nothing during the transaction and overnight transforming those into some first-rate exploration projects.
Right. The deal was cheap. It was certainly pennies on the dollar from what I see here. So can you clarify, because I don't even know, is the banned lands, is that just a national park boundary or what?
No, the national park, you can't operate inside the national park anyway, and it's a fairly small area. The ban is applied to Grand Canyon Country area, which is a bit of a nebulous area, but it encompasses essentially a good portion of the land, or at least checkerboarded land, parts of the land between the interstate that runs between Flagstaff and Gallup. I think it's I-40. And the Utah border. And so it's a wide swath of land. It's not the entire blanket, but it's a good portion of land in there. Here again, there's bits and pieces. There's access to the projects. So it's not, a blanket moratorium, but it certainly has affected a large and what we think is an unfair and disproportionate amount of the land. And we think we'll see some relief on that one way or another here over the course of the next year or two. I think it's super important that here again, these are the high-grade projects. If you want to make your 25 by 25, you need to open those up.
Right.
Because there's just no other source of that high-grade deposit in the U.S.
Right, and with that, you have projects you can more or less exploit there in Arizona now. And the ones that are under ban, the government's kind of just kind of watching that for you, kind of taking care of it while the ban gets lifted. So,
we view it as a bit of a it's a winning lottery ticket. We felt that we get a very good price on the assets that are not encumbered when we did the deal, and anything that that we can pry loose from the ban is icing on the cake or gravy, or however you want to look at that, but certainly something that's potentially an unexpected windfall for us.
Okay, so
and it's also part of our longer term strategy. I might just kind of mention that's the company's far more than those. Those are just the latest additions. Our key holdings for the long term are our in situ holdings in New Mexico, and that's where the bulk of our pounds are. We've already got substantial resources there. Both at Crown Point, Hosta Butte, and at Marquez. Marquez, I would note, is on private land, much closer to about halfway between Albuquerque and the Navajo Reservation. And, we've got substantial resources on all of those projects. We've got 43101 resources on Crown Point and Hosta Butte. We've got historic resources at Marquez. And those are just going to take a little bit longer. Many people view New Mexico as a place that you just probably aren't going to be able to do much work. We think it's a completely different ball game. We think you've got to make it to where the local population, wherever you are, be it New Mexico or anywhere else, has a reason to want you there. And in order to do that, you've got to align interests. And in order to do that, they have to have a piece of the action. It's that simple.
That's right.
And we don't have any problem with that. We've employed the same strategy, as you'd mentioned, in Golden Predator in the Yukon, working with indigenous people there. We enjoy great support there because of the same approach. And
right.
we think that approach is not uniquely favorable there. We think it's pretty much universal. If you can get people a reason to want you there, you stand a heck of a lot better chance of being able to move forward. So that's what we'll be doing there. You look at the predecessor entitled to that property, and we've got about half of the resources there, and Laramite's got a good chunk of them there as well. And the predecessor company spent, I don't know, $20 or $30 million in an equal number of years fighting for their rights in court, and they weren't one day closer to going into production at the end of that than they were at the beginning. And so I think that a different approach is clearly warranted, and we think, like I say, alignment of interest is key to moving any of these things forward in any of this business. So we're pretty keen on taking that approach. But we've got, just mentioning those resources, we've got 26 million pounds of 43101 U308 at Crown Point and Hosta Butte in the indicated category, and 6 million pounds more in the inferred just on those two projects. So those are the real key projects. We've also got mineral rights covering 46,000 hectares or 113,000 acres of prime hunting ground in the New Mexico area. Formerly private, it's all privately held mineral rights. It's the former railroad checkerboard that runs through there. So the company's got a real pipeline of projects in terms of shorter term small projects in Utah that can get funded or can get into production in a short period of time because they're dry, and Utah is an agreement state. That is, you don't have to go through the NRC to permit. You can do it at the state level. Being dry, you can get mines into production in certainly under 12 months. They're small, but it would be some cash flow. And then that gives us time to work on the breccia pipes in Arizona, which are sort of an intermediate term. And then long term are these big deposits in New Mexico. And those are in the 5+ year time frame. So it's a whole pipeline of projects, and we think it's not a mishmash of projects. It's been put together with that timeline in mind, because so many of these things take so long to get going. It's kind of a stepping stone strategy to get from where we are now to being a producer down the road.
Right. Well, you've got a suite of stages, and that's what's attractive is you have these different projects at different stages, and you can kind of put together that pipeline, U.S. domestically, and so that's a good setup. And then, of course, you mentioned the community outreach and the work with the sovereign nations. That's very important, and as you know, it's key to bringing any project to life. And then with that, with the projects and so forth, you can ramp up and start small and expand later as pricing, the price environment gets good and cash flow starts in. So on that kind of little bit of the same subject on the project, so the recent deal with Vein Minerals, tell us what you like about those projects, and is there something there that's going to be immediate focus?
That basically dovetailed into the Mediment acquisition of the breccia pipe lands. This cemented in, we were very heavy on the northern side of the Grand Canyon with those breccia pipes. This largely was done to acquire their database, which is not restricted to the withdrawn lands. Obviously, it covers a lot of that as well. But it basically can be looked at as completing our play on the Arizona breccia pipes. And here again, at even the Mediment acquisition was very economical. This one was even more economical. This one was, and it also gives us a first right to acquire anything they come up with. I don't view that as being that critical because they don't plan to be active. That's primarily an oil and gas company. But I think the main real thing is it completes our breccia pipe package in terms of data, in terms of millions of dollars worth of geophysics. And these breccia pipes are getting, the science of them has advanced so much over the years that through VTEM geophysics, they're fairly straightforward to identify. Then the only question is, are they mineralized or not? You can generally tell that with a drill hole or two. But to complete that data package, any relaxation in that withdrawal area, that data is going to pay dividends and quickly and significantly. So it was like I say, basically just I wouldn't call it a key transaction, but one to complete our data package and our play in that high grade breccia pipe area.
Okay. So the North Wash project, is there any interest in this project, or do you have an idea who might be looking to acquire this one?
I don't know, although I do know that it's subject to other discussions, and that's why it was excluded from the deal.
Okay. Okay. Well, that'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out. So moving on, as uranium prices move higher, what projects will kind of be the focus, and at what price will you start to hard charge towards production?
Well, here again, I think it's a twofold answer. When we see some positive, the report to Commerce is supposed to be out in April, I think. As we get some inclination as to which way that's going to go, even before a decision's made, if the report comes out as we think it will, I think you'll see us start working on the longer-term project of the community with respect to the New Mexico issue. That's going to be something we'll start on immediately, just because it's going to take some time. The other thing that I think you'll see is a move once the prices start to move, and here again I think you'll see that confirmed through the SWU price. I think that the next step would be to concentrate on our smallest assets, actually, but our quickest to market, if you will, and those would be some of the smaller deposits in eastern Utah. We've got historic resources in front of us, or in the face, if you will. Don't have 43101s on them, but here again, have extensive drilling by previous operators. And while they aren't big mines, they could establish, given the right parameters, could establish a bit of cash flow for the company, providing that we can get to the door first and take advantage of any toll milling availability that White Mesa might have.
Okay.
And then, of course, we'll be doing some drilling on our more advanced breccia pipe targets, because those would be the real keys to making some money over the next 5 to 6 year time frame.
So on toll milling, so how is the relationship at this point with Energy Fuels, and what information can you share related to the ongoing discussions related to the renewal of the toll milling agreement at White Mesa?
Well, I guess without getting, obviously, with ongoing negotiations, you don't want to get too specific. But I think the keys are, to get to their door first in terms of having some product to mill. So I think, there's a cast of characters that would like to use their mill for toll milling. Clearly, a certain amount of first come, first serve will probably be involved there, a sign of at least some faith in us and our ability, and they obviously have a vested interest. So I don't know how else to phrase that. We certainly are not looking at anything that's exclusive, but nonetheless, I think we'll have more than a fair shot at it.
Okay, well, very well, and you got ISR projects as well in kind of the portfolio there. So on the same
in
issue,
fact, they're actually a bigger portion of the overall project, because those New Mexico projects are ISR for the most part, and that's where an awful lot of depth of talent in our company is in the ISR field. Although we do have some conventional background as well, so we're well covered on that end. And obviously we'd like to have a mill and like to have an exclusive toll milling agreement, but who wouldn't right now? But we think we're in a good position to get to the front door relatively quickly with some product and make some progress along those lines.
So with some of the projects up in Wyoming and so forth, is the potential of constructing a new mill during this cycle for Encore? Is there still that possibility? Is that on the table? And what state do you think would be a good place?
Well, I think the first state you got to look at is whether or not they're an agreement state. And here again, this goes back to some of the details or nuances of the industry. And obviously the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in the U.S. regulates anything nuclear: transportation, mining, exploration, power plants. Every aspect of it they regulate, and they do so at a very high cost, and you pay for it as a proponent. You actually pay for their time reviewing your project. So I think what you see there with the agreement states is where the states have demonstrated a proficiency to the NRC, such that the states can regulate the nuclear activities within their state.
Wyoming,
especially with respect to Wyoming has just now become an agreement state. Utah's been one for a long time. Utah's a great place to do business because not only are they an agreement state, they've been doing it a long time. So they've got the system down, the parameters down, et cetera. Arizona less so. It's not an agreement state. So you end up dealing with the NRC there. New Mexico's the same way. Clearly, we would like to see them, both of those, become agreement states, and there's some possibility of that. Here again, it's largely a political discussion, and those winds kind of change with each election.
Right.
So we'll see what happens, but clearly the road to production and at least the permitting end of it is better and easier in an agreement state. As to whether or not we will entertain building a mill, I don't really see that as anything that's in the next 5 to 10 year time horizon. You ask about this cycle. I don't know. It's hard to answer that because I think this cycle actually may last 20 or 30 years, which would be new to the industry. Most of the cycles have been very brief, but we're looking for a less exciting, no skyrocketing price, but a sustainable, long-going industry, which would be welcome. So I would prefer to answer that by saying I don't see that happening in the next 5 to 10 years for Encore. There's a number of facilities around that potential deals could be worked on, potential upgrades. Several of them are mothballed, so it would take some work to get them going again. There are some licensed plants that are just completely inoperative that need a lot of work to get going, but that license is worth something in itself. So I think those are the things that we'd be looking at rather than doing something on our own. The one possible exception to that might be in terms of a leach project. And it's been years since there's been a leach project, and by that I mean surface leach in the U.S. But it's not inconceivable that certain deposits would lend themselves to a heap leach project. Right. And that's something that we might be looking at on our to conceivably be handled more by ourselves than with other conventional milling.
Right. Well, that's a interesting twist to it. So pick a state for me. What's the best? And I like Utah just for a number of things, not just their mining friendliness, but just the state across the board is good. Economics are great there. So give me a state that you like jurisdictionally for uranium.
I think I'd have to pick Utah at the top. It's as I mentioned before, there's a surprising amount of political support coming from Utah to open up the northern end of the Grand Canyon. And here again, that's because it's the Utah communities that benefit from that, or don't under the current situation. The population centers that would work in any sort of a mine or any sort of a development in northernmost Arizona up near the Utah border are all located in Utah. So even though they don't directly control the Arizona situation, they certainly can exert some influence at the national level in terms of getting that ban lifted, and that's something that we're working on. Right. And have had public support at various levels expressed for that, and even congressional support. So that's important, and I think it just expresses what you're talking about is the feeling and attitude in Utah. It's a can-do, open for business state, and so we would, and in fact that's where our first efforts would be with even though they're smaller deposits. Here again, with that attitude and being an agreement state, it's a lot easier to get to production there, given the right conditions.
Right, and my second one for me would be Wyoming, and I'm not from neither one of those states, but I have done some business with both of them, different things, and Utah is just.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And Wyoming's got a heck of a lot bigger uranium endowment than Utah, so it's clearly. Got the lion's share of the action. UR Energy's up there, of course, and Cameco's still got quite extensive holdings there. There's quite a few plants sitting there. So you've still got the Sweetwater Mill that's idled there in the southwest corner of the state. Then you've got a couple of ISL plants up further to the northeast. So Wyoming is, it's an area that we have not got a lot of projects in now, but we'd certainly like to expand given the right opportunities. We're always looking, but it has to make sense to the company in terms of the overall economic impact and our ability to finance it.
Right. Those states, among just a few others, Utah specifically, these are model states that other states within the United States need to look at. I mean, there's only a few left, and they have incredible economics, and they are a model socially, economically, politically across the board for other states they should copy. But not sure that's going to happen. But nonetheless, we do like these regions. And that's coming from me being from Oregon, which I can't speak too positively of. So anyway, moving on to another, what is Encore planning to remain in the U.S. only, or is there a view to consider other jurisdictions?
Nope, we're quite happy in the U.S. The U.S. is 22 to 24% of the world's market for uranium, depending on which survey you look at, and we don't see it. As we'd already spoken, getting up to 25% domestic production of that demand will be quite a challenge and quite a welcome mandate should it come by. So we view the metrics of the uranium business as quite favorable for the U.S., and that's where we intend to stay.
Okay. Well, that sounds good, and we've already kind of covered the Section 232 stuff and how that outcome is pending, and there'll probably, you and I both agree that there'll be some kind of a positive outcome come out of that. So kind of moving to...
Stage is certainly set for it, yeah. Stage is set for it.
Yeah, it really, I can't see it getting much better. It really is set quite well. So you've been in the business for quite a while, including your past success during the last cycle. From a global perspective, or from even domestically, is there any other uranium businesses and specific industry veterans that still exist today that you like or want to mention?
I think the real key and one of our needs is finding some young blood to integrate into the business. The biggest single problem uranium faces in the long run really is personnel. And we've, with the exception of that 2-year blip we had last time, we've missed several generations of technical ability that have not gone into the uranium business that have gone elsewhere. I mean, it's hard to find uranium experts under 60 years old. And, that's going to become a real issue. And so when you look around, you've got to have, I think, companies that have experience not just in one of the aspects of the fuel cycle, but all of them, as well as some sort of program to bring along some young blood, because that's going to become an ever increasing issue.
I think, I agree with you. And we've talked. Dustin Garrow and I have talked about that. Dustin's been on and had a discussion about that before. Even John Borshoff has mentioned that as well, about the lack of operational expertise, not only in the mining side, but Bill, all the way through the fuel cycle, the nuclear engineers, the training for operators at plants. I mean, the whole industry is significantly lacking.
Yep. No, it's a real critical problem, and that it goes back again to the one place that's not the factor, and that's in China and Russia, and that's part of why they're getting increasing dominance in a field that, quite frankly, we should not be happy with them having. They don't have a shortage. They've been educating people right and left to do these jobs. There's been instead of a skipping of generations, there's been a push to increase it, and I think that's nuclear energy. While it's a nice peaceful thing, I think that it's certainly obviously got other more sinister uses, and I think to have people that are not necessarily to use my own words, they don't have their interest aligned with ours. And I don't think that it's a business that we really want to fall very far behind in, but without some serious efforts to change, we're going to fall even further behind.
Right. No, that's absolutely correct. And there's no better time to align the stars and light a fire under the behinds of the industry. So it certainly is the way to go. So I hope that that's being viewed and starting to come out. And with this Section 232, that might be one of the catalyst indicators for the industry to kind of get back going in the right direction. So
it is. And one other thing I might also mention, you were talking about other companies. How about another project? And this, I think, has real profound implications for the public acceptance of nuclear energy. And that's something that Westinghouse, even though they sold their nuclear power plant division, they have nonetheless remained in the nuclear fuel business. And they've come up with, and it's actually ironically called Encore, spelled the same way. We had the name first, but I don't think we'll give them too much trouble about using it. But what they've done is they've actually gone in and they've been trying to design a fuel rod that will not melt down, which if you can come up with a fuel that is meltdown proof, I think you'll go a long ways towards establishing more public acceptance of nuclear energy. And they have gone through pilot scale testing. Basically what they're doing, instead of cladding a nuclear fuel rod all the way down, they're actually making segments so that the cladding actually extends into the rod, and each one's in essence about an inch long pellet of zirconium alloy clad material with the nuclear fuel bundle inside, or not bundle, but the nuclear fuel rod inside that cladding. And it slows down the reaction, not just between rods, but also up and down vertically within the rod, enough to where the heat generated won't melt it down. And it goes into commercial testing this year. And if that proves a positive, I think it could have profound and revolutionary changes to the industry. So I would say that, that's something that too many people are watching. The SWU price is something that too many people are watching. And then, of course, 232, there's a lot of eyes on that. But I think those are your three key developments. And for us, of course, some relief on the land situation in Arizona would be beneficial. Not integral to our success, but certainly would be icing on the cake. But those are the things to keep an eye on, in my opinion.
And I would add that now that you mentioned technology, the Lightbridge fuel, the work that they're doing there at Lightbridge is interesting. Certainly has some time to go, but certainly interesting in what they're doing there with the fuel rod technology and how they're improving the safety ratings and the efficiency of the fuel. And then also too, I have to make a mention of NuScale. It's just coming fresh off my mind. Just had a conversation with Jay Serena at NuScale, which is incidentally out of Oregon, and their progress with the NRC launching the SMRs. And I think that this technology, Bill, has incredible potential to be a real game changer in the next 10 years.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think those are the sort of things that can revolutionize the industry and make it more acceptable. If you can get a safer design.
Absolutely. So looking on the competitor side, I want to twist your arm just a little bit more. Is there any competitor companies domestically that you like, or anything you want to mention?
Well, I think clearly Energy Fuels and UR Energy being in production at the right time. I mean, if you're in production when this starts, just look at the best example is how well Mustania, even though it was a private company, look how well they did during the last uranium boom, because they were one of the few small companies in production when the price hit. And not only did they benefit, heck, they basically established the spot price because they were one of the few sellers into the spot market. And Paul Goranson was running that project at the time, incidentally, but in South Texas. But so I think, clearly anytime you're in production, you've got a leg up on the competition. So, UR and Energy Fuels are certainly right in there. UEC certainly has the ability to produce with the Hobson plant. That was the plant that Energy Metals refurbished. And then Uranium One sold off to the folks there, and have moved that forward. Not sure what their resource status is or plans to go into production, but they've certainly got a plant. And but I guess my favorites are still UR and Energy Fuels, just because they're the established leaders. They aren't as big as Cameco or anything like that, but they both. And UR, I know, has several projects with some decent life. I don't know the intimate details, and not in the business of recommending other companies too often. But I think you can't escape looking at those two.
Sure. Well, very well. I appreciate you making some comments on that. So looking ahead to 2019, what are the key tasks, even 2020, what are the key tasks that Encore is looking to accomplish, and how will it position itself to kind of take advantage of potentially what looks to start looking like some improving uranium prices?
Well, I think we have to have confirmation of that. And that there are two things on a worldwide basis: some confirmation that pricing is going to go up, which I'm still skeptical we'll see this year. As we've talked, I view the domestic situation very differently. So when we see some encouragement, like a report coming out of committee or a report coming out of Commerce endorsing this, such that it's teed up ready for either congressional or presidential action, I think that will be our note at which we'll need to start getting aggressive, both on the small mine front in Utah, or in terms of looking at our projects there to see if we can develop some production quickly out of that, based on the historic numbers there, or I shouldn't say and at the same time start what I would view as an aggressive effort at the community level in New Mexico to move those things forward. So a very short-term oriented one, as well as a very long-term oriented one. And in terms of our efforts in Arizona, those lobbying efforts go on. We aren't waiting on anything. We're moving forward on those and have been for the last few months, probably better part of a year now. About the only thing we spend money on other than keeping our projects. And, I think the one thing that would create a bit of difference there is, once we see the actual positive action taken on with reference to 232 or the domestic pricing, I think at that point we'll probably break out the drill rig and poke some holes in some of the more advanced projects in Arizona that are not affected by any adversities right now. So you've basically got three things to look forward to in terms of that, and they actually hit our short, mid-term, and long-term plans, addressing each of them to differing degrees. But quite frankly, they all need something. We've been surprised with government before, and as positive as I am about 232, we're going to wait before we spend, any of our precious resources in terms of capital, or look at raising any more until we get at least a report out of committee. And just like Judge Flynn's sentencing yesterday caught everybody off guard, as it was a complete misdirection from what people had been talking about. You just never know with the government. And there is a lobbying effort with some of the utility fuel buyers to squash 232, and I think it's not terribly aggressive on their part. I think it's mostly talk, but obviously it increases their cost, even though it's a very minimal amount. But they're at least making the talk. So while I'm incredibly optimistic, and I think the odds are 95% at least that we'll get some sort of action, we're going to wait till we see at least something out of committee on that, and that'll be our sign to move forward. And I think the uranium market will have advanced enough to where at that point we can look at doing a bit of financing. But at the 10 to 15 cent level, we don't have any interest in financing. We've got cash to carry on with what we need to right now.
Very well. Yep. Yeah, I agree, and there's certainly there's no reason to jump the gun here. So I think with you guys and the conservative nature of this company, I think it makes sense just to kind of wait it out. And you guys are already taking a few actions to kind of prepare, and those have obviously been well noted, as we discussed earlier. So how can potential investors get more information, and how can they contact Encore Energy?
Well, then they can contact myself. My email is wms@encoreenergycorp.com. I know a bit of a cumbersome email, but nonetheless, WMS@EncoreEnergyCorp.com. And they can look forward to a new website. Literally, we haven't updated the website in 2 years. And here again, that was part of our austerity program. We will have a new website out before the end of the year, updated. All of our regulatory filings, financials, et cetera, can be found on cdar.com. But in terms of, the ease of having them on a website, new PowerPoint presentation, all of those things will be here by the end of the year. And at such time, we'll also put out a news announcement just so the world knows we're still here and haven't gone anywhere, and simply been maintaining the shop and improving our position during the last few years.
Okay.
So a bit of a reemergence, if you will.
And I'm just looking at that website now. It's in front of me. It's EncoreEnergyCorp.com. So it's pretty simple,
Right.
Or you can just Google it, and it's probably the first hit. So pretty simple to get more information about the company.
It is, and like I say, I apologize for the out-of-date information, but we literally have not spent any penny that we didn't have to spend over the last couple of years. So it's it's served us well at this point to have a complete treasury and ready to do something. So
certainly commendable. Appreciate you taking the time today, Bill, and good luck.
Oh, thank you very much. I look forward to better times ahead for the uranium market.